South Park has always thrived on pushing buttons, and this time, they aimed straight at Harry and Meghan. The royal couple responded, lawsuits flying back and forth like sparks in a storm. It's a classic case of don't poke the bear. You go after South Park, you're lighting a hornet's nest, and everyone knows it. The irony isn't lost. Harry and Meghan plead for privacy, yet the moment they step into the spotlight, they're everywhere: magazines, interviews, headlines. It's a clash between wanting normalcy and craving attention, and the world is watching the paradox unfold. I experienced the absurdity firsthand. One morning, barely awake and still in my underwear, I flopped down in front of the TV for a bit of peace. And there he is, Prince Harry, speaking directly about me. Vulnerable, groggy, and unprepared, I realized just how surreal the intersection of celebrity, media, and privacy can be. The episode of life they're living is stranger than any cartoon could capture, but somehow, South Park comes dangerously close. Imagine this. I'm lounging in my underwear, just waking up, trying to savor a few quiet minutes with the TV on. And then, bam, a prince knows my name. Not literally, of course, but there he is. Prince Harry speaking about vaccine misinformation, Afghanistan, and a cascade of other headlines. It's surreal. You blink, and suddenly your living room has turned into the intersection of global celebrity and personal vulnerability. Harry's life has always been tangled with high-profile personalities. Take Diddy, for instance. He's the kind of person who's been everywhere and with everyone. People recount stories of Diddy being incredibly generous, never asking for anything until 1 a.m. Then he might freak off, a pattern of wild unpredictability, much like the environments Harry seems to orbit. The question lingers, could Harry and Meghan ever return to the UK as working royals? Most insiders, and Harry himself, say no. Even before factoring in all the media chaos surrounding them, it seems impossible. And the situation is so intense that, reportedly, there's a war room in England devoted to figuring out what to do about the fallout from the couple's public appearances and statements. The Joe Rogan Experience was supposed to be just another interview, but it quickly turned into a headline-grabbing spectacle. Harry's conversation escalated from awkward to explosive in minutes. Sharp jabs, tense accusations, and heated exchanges erupted in front of millions of viewers. The clip went viral, leaving the internet stunned, and prompting debates over what triggered Harry's outburst and who truly crossed the line. The fallout didn't stop there. Reports suggest even Taliban commanders have trolled Harry over his recounting of Afghanistan, tied to his role as a military pilot, a stark reminder of the scrutiny attached to every aspect of his life. Meanwhile, Meghan's own media presence, from game shows to public appearances, has been dissected endlessly. She once held a briefcase on Deal or No Deal, and even that was parsed as an example of objectification, showing how relentlessly the public examines every move. Back to the Joe Rogan interview. Harry entered expecting a sympathetic platform but instead faced a host with zero tolerance for soft questions. Rogan immediately probed Harry's "just call me Harry" branding, pointing out contradictions like still using Prince on his book cover. When Harry defended himself, claiming it was about reclaiming his story, Rogan countered with evidence: Netflix deals, documentaries, the memoir itself. Harry insisted it wasn't fame-chasing, but survival, a life lived under relentless public scrutiny. As the interview progressed, tensions heightened. Rogan questioned why Harry's struggles seemed more important than those of ordinary people without megaphones. Harry explained that his story revealed systems of control most cannot see, likening his royal life to a prison where every gesture was managed for the public eye. Observers have even described a royal war room strategy to manage the fallout from his memoir, a testament to the stakes involved. At its core, the Rogan episode wasn't just an interview. It was a collision of worlds: Hollywood attention, royal legacy, personal trauma, and global media scrutiny, all unfolding live. Harry's attempt to reclaim his narrative collided head-on with the reality of fame he was born into, sparking one of the most explosive and analyzed interviews in recent memory. The tension peaked when Joe leaned forward and asked Harry to paint a picture of what this so-called prison really looked like. That's when the conversation began its slow, unraveling descent. Harry, already navigating a storm of public scrutiny, seemed to momentarily lose the plot. The memoir had been controversial enough, detailing intimate moments, personal losses, even his military experiences in Afghanistan, but speaking live, the intensity ratcheted up. Harry began describing royal life as an emotional cage. Every move, every word, even his grief, he claimed, was choreographed by the institution. The world mourned his mother louder than his own family, he said, and he was told how to feel, what to say, and who he was allowed to be. To him, the monarchy wasn't a family, it was a machine, relentless and controlling. Joe asked the question that lingered in everyone's minds. Could Harry and his family ever return to the UK and resume roles as working royals? Harry's answer was unequivocal no. Even if an agreement were possible, he said, there would always be forces ensuring that returning wouldn't be livable. The palace might not outright block them, but they could make life intolerable. For a brief moment, Joe softened, acknowledging the trauma of losing his mother in such a public way. But he quickly returned to the point everyone wonders about. If Harry craves privacy, why continue putting his life on display? Netflix, interviews, books, the whole spectrum? Harry didn't waver. Privacy, he said, isn't silence, it's control. It's the power to decide what to share and when. Joe countered, reminding him that public perception is beyond his control. People will draw their own conclusions, and many see Harry as a spotlight chaser. That prompted Harry's first sharp retort. Those who fail to grasp nuance are simply ignorant. And if Joe's audience fell into that group, that wasn't his concern, a line that even the control room seemed to react to. Trying to steer the discussion, Joe brought up Harry's brother, William, asking if he regretted airing family disputes in his book. Harry stood firm. What he exposed had already festered behind closed doors. Joe pressed, William never published a memoir about Harry, making him the first to go public. Harry framed it as a response to years of relentless media coverage. The palace, he noted, rarely comments on family matters, though a spokesperson had recently issued a statement to CNN addressing some of the issues Harry raised. The statement emphasized that all matters had been repeatedly and meticulously reviewed. Harry, however, rejected this, asserting that the press had hunted him from childhood, and only now was he finally speaking back. When Joe asked whether this was self-defense or an outright attack, Harry didn't flinch. The constant public scrutiny, the invasive cameras, and the pressure of life in the royal spotlight had left him no choice but to answer on his terms. Joe tried to ease the tension, reminding Harry that he had chosen to be on the podcast. Nobody had forced him. But Harry pushed back, accusing Joe of hiding judgment behind his questions. Joe didn't flinch. He insisted he was only after an honest conversation, not a theatrical, poor me, the spare performance. That was the spark, the moment the air thickened with friction. From there, the podcast stopped feeling like a casual discussion. It became more like the opening bell of a championship fight. Both men on edge, both swinging harder than expected. The energy in the room shifted, tense, electric, unpredictable. Eventually, Joe steered the conversation toward Meghan, knowing it was inevitable. Harry braced himself immediately, arguing that the world still couldn't handle a woman of color marrying into the royal family without scrutinizing every move she made. Meghan, he explained, was highly calculated, a trained actress in her own right. Not a conventional performer, but someone who had studied people, and Princess Diana, particularly down to her gestures and the way she engaged with Harry as a child. Harry recounted the psychological layers of Meghan's approach, the symbolic acts, the gestures, even her emotional intensity, all crafted to convince him she was a continuation of Diana, that he had a chance to save her in ways he couldn't with his mother. According to Harry, this performance worked brilliantly. She influenced him to make the decision to leave the UK, framing it as his own idea while layering in personal stakes, threats, and emotional pressure tied to their unborn child. Joe challenged Harry on perception. He noted that many observers weren't focused on race. They saw a consistent pattern. Whenever things went wrong, Harry and Meghan blamed the crown, the press, or the institution. everyone except themselves. Harry shut that down immediately, insisting they were never the problem. That assertion changed the room's atmosphere again. His demeanor shifted from irritation to a dangerous intensity, a sense that he was prepared for confrontation, not conversation. Joe tried to bring things back to simpler terms. He asked if Harry thought any criticism of Meghan was valid, or if every negative story automatically signaled racism or conspiracy. Harry didn't hesitate. "When you're married to someone as powerful and misunderstood as Meghan," he said, "most criticism comes from jealousy, ignorance, or outright racism." His tone left no room for ambiguity, reinforcing the idea that in his eyes, their narrative was inseparable from the systemic forces working against them. Joe rubbed his forehead, trying to keep his composure as Harry doubled down on some extraordinary claims. He pointed out that Harry was essentially suggesting millions of people around the world operated with the same malicious intent. Harry didn't flinch. "Yes," he said, "that's exactly what happens." The air in the room thickened, and you could start to see a pattern emerging, one that anyone watching closely could feel. Right after Harry declares, "I found the love of my life," there's a brief, almost imperceptible pause, a fraction of a second loaded with tension. It's subtle, but noticeable. His blink rate spikes the moment he adds, "And now I have the opportunity to start a family with her." Microexpressions and stress signals don't lie. Even in that joyful sentiment, there's evidence of internal conflict. Observers have noted this behavior repeatedly in his videos, hinting at a complicated, perhaps even uneasy, dynamic beneath the surface. Joe tried to press, suggesting that Harry's words implied anyone who disagreed was beneath him. Harry's smirk was sharp. "People who repeat tabloid nonsense are beneath me," he said. Even the control room reacted to that one. Joe shifted the discussion to the contradictions in Harry and Meghan's story, moving to America for privacy while continuing to do interviews, documentaries, and podcasts. Harry cut him off quickly. "Privacy doesn't mean hiding. It means choosing what to share." But the question lingered. If he hated the press so much, why continue speaking publicly? Harry didn't hesitate. "His story deserves space," he said, "and people like Joe need to hear it." Around that time, rumors began circulating that a Taliban commander had responded to Harry's claims about his time in Afghanistan as a pilot, highlighting the ongoing ripple effect of his disclosures. Whether fully verified or not, it underscored just how globally sensitive his words are. Then the conversation turned even sharper. Joe asked who Harry meant by people like him. Harry leaned in, going on the offensive. Joe was just another man in a soundproof studio, judging someone who had lived trauma he couldn't possibly comprehend. "A few UFC fights and a Spotify deal don't qualify you to analyze centuries of monarchy," Harry snapped. Joe muttered "damn" under his breath, but Harry wasn't done. He accused Joe of trying to dissect his life, of expecting deference, and of treating the studio like a royal tribunal rather than a conversation. Joe tried to bring things back to a normal rhythm, reminding Harry it was just a dialogue. But Harry was in full battle mode. He insisted Joe wasn't accustomed to interviewing someone who had faced the level of scrutiny and pressure he had endured. "I remember watching all this unfold one morning. I just rolled out of bed, still in my underwear, and plopped down in front of the TV, half asleep and completely unprepared. And there he was, Prince Harry, talking about me, about the world, about the stories that now dominated headlines. Vulnerable, groggy, and utterly human, I realized just how surreal it is when a prince's life and his narrative feels so intimately present in your living room. My first thought, wait, did I do something? Honestly," Harry argued, "if people are turning to him for vaccine advice, whose fault is that really?" He framed it with his characteristic blend of humor and deflection. "He's a professional talker, not a medical expert. Some of what I say makes sense," he admitted. "Some of it doesn't. It's up to you to figure out which is which." He even joked about his own questionable past antics, like making people eat strange things on TV, pointing out that medicine wasn't exactly his forte. Joe tried to pivot the conversation, noting that most of his guests don't insult the audience. Harry shrugged it off, suggesting maybe they just needed to toughen up. When Joe asked about his relationship with William, Harry immediately closed the door. Joe pressed. He had written about William publicly, so naturally, the world wanted answers. Harry countered that the public's hunger for conflict was relentless, and Joe pushed back, reminding him he'd fed the fire himself, referencing Harry's claim that William had shoved him and broken his necklace. Harry didn't waver. He stood by every word. When Joe asked if airing these claims made reconciliation more difficult, Harry's response was blunt. Reconciliation is impossible without accountability. Forgiveness without conditions? Not for him. "I'm not Jesus," he said. He was protecting himself, not punishing anyone, he insisted. He simply revealed the truth as he saw it. Throughout, Harry framed speaking out as almost a mental health necessity, a long-standing burden finally coming to the surface. "I know I've made mistakes," he admitted. "Wrong judgments and decisions. But fundamentally, I acted for the right reasons." There was a strange mix of guilt and justification in his tone, as if acknowledging his own fallibility was part of his defense. Then Joe asked the question hanging over the entire discussion. Had anyone ever told him he might be part of the problem? Harry's reaction was immediate and sharp. People who suggested that, he said, were weak, unable to face the truth. Joe stared, stunned. Harry didn't flinch. If the shoe fits, it fits. That statement changed the dynamic completely. The guest was no longer a royal figure. He was someone unraveling in time. Joe attempted to calm the energy, but Harry smirked knowingly. He treated the back and forth as a battle already won in his own mind, convinced he was dominating the conversation. The crew watched in stunned silence, feeling the tension like a slow-motion car crash. For context, Harry's world has always intersected with larger-than-life figures. He'd hung with Diddy, who had a reputation for being generous, yet unpredictable. Harry referenced this dynamic almost casually, yet it underscored his familiarity with high-pressure, intense personalities. Joe's irritation finally surfaced, narrowing his eyes, while Harry leaned back, arms crossed, self-assured and satisfied, convinced he was winning the argument, whatever the rules of engagement might have been. Joe exhaled slowly, trying to regain control of the conversation, but Harry wasn't having it. Almost immediately, he tossed another sly jab, smirking as if he'd done nothing wrong. Joe attempted to steer toward the topic of responsibility, but Harry laughed, sharp, incredulous, and accused Joe of trying to trap him with the same loaded questions every interviewer used. He leaned in, implying that Joe was no different from the press, setting him up for failure. When Joe brought up Spare, Harry's demeanor shifted again, pride and irritation mingling in equal measure. Joe rattled off the intensely personal revelations from the book, including the infamous frostbite story, prompting a few chuckles from the crew. Harry's eyes cut to them, cold and precise, letting them know he wasn't amused. Joe pressed further. Did he regret any of it? Not a word, Harry said firmly. When Joe specifically mentioned the story of William shoving him, breaking his necklace, and knocking him into a dog bowl, Harry doubled down. He stood by every word, undeterred by the fallout or the lawsuits, including the one involving South Park. "Kick that hornet's nest," he seemed to say with his stance. Harry painted it plainly. Someone wanted attention, they got it. Privacy, he said, was the stated goal, but magazines, interviews, and headlines told another story. Joe tried a more conciliatory approach, suggesting that if Harry thought he was mocking him, they could stop the discussion there. Harry scoffed, insisting the world was far too sensitive. "Should I whisper my story to myself in the mirror?" he asked, dismissive. The subtext was clear. The memoir, the interviews, they were as much a business decision as a personal revelation. To survive financially and narratively, he had to speak, and to sell a book, shocking or controversial disclosures were part of the deal. Joe leaned forward, emphasizing that no one asked him to hide, but there's a line between honesty and oversharing. Harry shrugged, matter of fact. The public deserved the truth. Joe countered. The public doesn't need access to his family's private life. Harry laughed, pointing out the irony. Joe built an entire career on broadcasting conversations. Behind the glass, the producer whispered, "He's unreal." The discussion shifted, touching on Meghan. Harry described her influence with almost surgical precision, calling her ambitious, calculating, a former deal or no-deal briefcase holder who had effectively infiltrated his world. Whether she was manipulating or simply persuasive, Harry framed it as a decisive factor in the choices he made. Joe, still keeping his composure, finally leveled with Harry. For someone who calls himself free and a truth-teller, you sound more angry and bitter than enlightened, he said. It was the first moment in the conversation where the tone landed fully. Harry wasn't just defending a narrative. He was waging a subtle war of perception, every word measured, every defense sharpened like a blade. Harry leaned back in the chair, legs crossed with that unmistakable regal poise, claiming he was enlightened. The statement, delivered with a smirk, seemed to get under Joe's skin immediately. Joe reminded him that he was literally in his studio, following his show's format, but Harry just leaned further back, eyes glinting, and told him he looked threatened. That single line, Harry accusing Joe of feeling threatened, sent a ripple through the room, cracking the tension like a sudden thunderclap. Joe set his headphones down, incredulous. Did Harry really believe that? Harry shrugged, suggesting Joe was flustered, and the back and forth escalated. Joe attempted to steer the conversation back toward William, but Harry snapped, flat and firm, that he was tired of repeating himself. Even questions about his own accomplishments seemed to irritate him. He hesitated, then launched into a speech about redefining royalty, his vision of monarchy and personal legacy setting the room on edge. Joe tried to redirect, noting that public discourse now seemed obsessed with drama rather than achievements. Harry deflected, blaming the media, only for Joe to clarify that he wasn't the media, just someone asking questions Harry had agreed to answer. Harry rolled his eyes and tossed out a stinging jab about Americans being all the same, instantly chilling the room. Joe warned him to tread carefully. Harry, unfazed, shot back that he didn't need sympathy from peasants. The word hung in the air like a bomb. Even the control room froze, stunned. Joe repeated it to make sure he'd heard correctly. Harry smirked, doubling down, and for a moment, it seemed like the interview might collapse entirely. Rather than shut it down, Joe called for a brief pause. Harry, meanwhile, tapped his fingers impatiently, as if expecting palace staff to materialize at any moment. The studio air thickened with anticipation. In the interlude, Harry rambled about a future he imagined, retiring to a quiet Cotswolds village, spending his days with a pipe in hand, solving cases like a character out of a detective novel, half Daniel Craig in Knives Out, half Hercule Poirot, the Belgian sleuth. The image was absurd, charming, and slightly surreal, and the room hung on every word. When the cameras restarted, Joe returned calm but steely, a storm contained in measured composure. He sat, locked eyes with Harry, and picked up exactly where the tension had left off. The first topic? Harry's earlier remark, calling the public peasants. From that moment on, the interview resumed with the kind of charged intensity that made it clear this was no longer a casual chat. It was a battle of presence, words, and perception. Harry waved off Joe's concerns as mere sarcasm, but Joe reminded him. He had said it 3 times. Harry shrugged and insisted. People were just being dramatic. The crew exchanged uneasy glances, sensing the tension spike. Joe pressed further, and Harry leaned back, feigning boredom. If people were offended, maybe the word fits, he said, brushing it off like a passing inconvenience. When the topic shifted toward Meghan, Harry's patience snapped. He warned Joe not to repeat any rumors, his tone sharp and unmistakable. Joe remained composed, explaining that every guest received the same treatment, questions and challenges alike. Harry accused him of chasing a meltdown, trying to manufacture a spectacle. Joe asked a pointed question. If Harry felt cornered, why return at all? Harry paused, frozen for a beat, then said simply, "People deserved my truth." Joe chuckled, remarking that he sounded like someone who couldn't handle being questioned. Harry's jaw tightened, a visible signal of the simmering tension. Then, with a quiet fury, he delivered his bombshell. He refused to be disrespected by mediocrity. The studio went silent. Every eye was on him. The conversation veered unexpectedly into Meghan's past, referencing her time on Deal or No Deal. Harry described her role, holding the briefcases, and addressed criticisms of objectification with sharp reasoning. "Did you think it was an executive position?" he asked rhetorically. "She was doing her job. How is that objectification?" His perspective, though controversial, revealed his unwavering defense of her choices and reputation. The interview, intended to clarify his narrative, had instead spiraled into chaos, a volatile mix of defensiveness, raw emotion, and confrontational commentary. The viewers were left to decide, was Harry standing his ground, or was he digging himself into deeper controversy? One thing became certain. The exchange was unforgettable, a clash that would echo across social media and entertainment news for weeks. For those hungry for unfiltered celebrity drama, insider breakdowns, and the latest from Hollywood and British royalty, this was a masterclass in both. Hit subscribe, tap like, and turn on notifications, because the next chapter of this saga promises even more drama, perspective, and intrigue.